I had two little kids and a wife, a home, dogs, everything that everybody dreams about having. And I put all that to the side because I just couldn't deal with it anymore. On October 24th of 2017, when I called 911 and I hung up the phone, I went on my back deck and I put my uniform on. I went on my back deck with my shotgun and I called for help from a couple of friends. I was emotionally shot. I was done. I had a shotgun by my side, fully loaded, chambered, ready to go, and I thought about ending it.
What's going on, guys? RDAP Dan, Federal Prison Time Consulting. Hope everybody's having a fantastic day. I know it's been a while. I've been pretty busy, but today we have a awesome and educational guest with us. We have a gentleman by the name of Paul Harrington Sr., who has an amazing book out right now, Justice or Not. And the cool thing is Paul has some experience, quite a bit of experience, over 20 plus years as a corrections officer in the New York State prison system. How are you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, Paul. So you're going to tell us a little bit. I know we're here. We're going to talk about your book quite a bit, and there's a link in the description of this if you want to pick up Paul's book. But from what Andre is telling me, and Andre is a colleague of mine, somebody that you know as well, your book is selling pretty good. So kind of take us through a little bit of how did you go from being a corrections officer to a ex-corrections officer who's selling a book?
Back in my days of working in New York State Corrections, I've had this opportunity to meet another author. His name was Ted Conover, and he wrote this book called New Jack Guarding Sing Sing. He wanted to, as a report writer, he wanted to do a story about corrections, but the Department of Corrections told him, no, you can't do that. So he said, all right, well, I'm going to do it. So he actually left his job, took the test for New York State Corrections, went to the academy, got through his training, and was working as a correction officer full-time for a year at Sing Sing. He completed his year, and he ended up quitting and resigning, obviously, to write the book called New Jack Guarding Sing Sing. So I saw that as an opportunity. When I got out, he was my inspiration to write my book. After all the experiences that I had been through and everything that I wanted to share in my fight with the justice system here on the injustices, if you will, within New York State Corrections, so that the footsteps that I had to take won't be they won't have to follow them anybody else in my past, like that worked with me. I don't want anybody else to endure what I had to go through. So
Gotcha.
when I left corrections, I was able to get a 3/4 disability retirement. I was set my goals. Now, I've always been a good report writer. I've done a lot of stories for the media. I was a photojournalist for quite some time, even during my job with corrections. But I kind of applied that to my book that I wanted to write. And the book, it took three years to write, another year of post-production with the publisher. The book could have been written much sooner than that, but I had to wait on certain things within a timeline to happen for me to complete the story.
Okay, so now tell us, we're going to get into a lot of that in the story of why you did this. So my story, completely opposite of yours. I was somebody that went into prison. I went into the federal prison system, and I know you were a corrections officer in the state side. Is your stance now, is it more of the injustices in the state prison system towards the correction officers, towards the injustice towards the inmates, or more of an overall? Like, tell us a little bit about kind of where your stance is on that, so the listeners have an idea of what they would be getting out of this book.
So in the Department of Corrections eyes, their number one priority is obviously prisoners. Because they are number one priority, they are a ward of state. That's their responsibility. A correction officer comes in, he's number two. The inmate is number one, and officers are number two. That's how it rolls in there. The reason why, an officer's job is what they call an item number, and you're easily replaced because you're just a number. the idea of corrections saying, you know, we have to take care of the inmates first and the officers last is really kind of dumbfounded, because when you think about it, the officers that go in there and work in those facilities, we like to call down in the trenches, they're the ones that have to deal with all the problems. The first thing, they walk into the door, the gate slams behind them. They're going into a dormitory or a block, depending on what prison they're in, and they're dealing with inmates firsthand. So the problem here lies with, with correction officers. There are bad eggs in every basket. I worked with a lot of great people. I can't say that enough. I had a lot of great experiences in there in the early days, but then as time went along, systems, administration changes, policy changes, directives, things like that. It just started tying our hands behind our back more and more. But when I say that there's bad eggs in every basket, and I mean that for pretty much every type of job there is out there, specifically more of corrections, we have this problem where, officers are dealt with. The issue is with nepotism, because so many family members work in there with each other. If there's an issue with one officer and something happened politically, that discipline might not be the same for that individual as it would have been for someone else. I know other officers that I worked with on other shifts that had actually more seniority than me that took notes all through their career and said, I want to know what happens to this guy, because I wrote down what happened to the other guy. And if he doesn't get the same treatment or the same discipline, then there's an issue here. So if he happens to get caught up or jammed up or something, he's going to say, hey, listen, why am I being treated like this when you did this for ABC? And that's exactly what happened with me. I didn't get jammed up, but I had myself in some situations where I had to take responsibility and do the right thing on reporting it. So when you're doing something like that in corrections, sometimes it's not always favorably looked upon. They like to sweep things under the rug, and definitely don't like outside agencies getting involved in their business.
Gotcha. So tell me a little bit about when you left, or when did you leave the corrections facility, and how do other correctional officers view you now from what you're doing with writing the book? Are they do they advocate the book, or are they more of against it?
So that's a little bit of a long-winded question, but I'll start back. Basically, I left corrections May 9th, 2017. I had an incident with another officer they call workplace violence. This was, of course, witnessed by one other officer who was working at his post. There was shift change. I worked a 2:30 to 10:30 shift, as what we called Tour 3. And as I was coming down a long tunnel to enter Building 21 to get to my post, an officer that I had been having problems with, in the months past, or prior to that, I'm sorry, things just started getting worse and worse. And it became a point of the harassment started verbally, and then it started involving a lot of my property there at the, that I had, like a locker and certain things at my posts that were tampered with, just to harass me. And then it got to the point that day where I was assaulted by that officer so bad that I had to leave in an ambulance and ultimately had to have shoulder and neck surgery as a result of that incident.
Wow. So you actually got physically attacked from one of the other officers? And was this like where was this? Were there inmates around? Who could see this?
So during shift change, there are no inmates around, at least not in that area. The tunnel areas normally is cleared because officers are coming and going off duty and on duty. So the only person that had saw it was one officer there who was working a Delta checkpoint at Fishkill Correctional Facility, which is located in the 21 building complex, or up the hill, as we call it at Fishkill. Now, when I went out and I reported it, I was giving an ultimatum by a supervisor who wasn't the regular sergeant on that shift. He was working that shift. I don't know if he was on a swap or something else, but he wasn't the regular supervisor that had the bid for that building. When I approached him and tell him what happened, I said, I'm in a lot of pain. I need to take care of this. And he says, well, listen, if you want to report this officer, this is somebody that I know very well. If you report him, you might be able to have him stop his actions, but you won't be able to stop his friends. Ultimately, they'll come after you. So my suggestion to you, and this is what the sergeant's telling me, is that he told me to fill out an accident report or an injury report, that he suggested that I had been injured by running into a door, a heavy steel door. But then I said to myself, I have to think about this. Let me get back to you. So I waited a couple hours. I talked to a lot of officers there that I'm friends with and people that know me, and they all gave me, their input. But it was a real tough position. I mean, he either wanted me to fill out a false injury report, thereby having, a workers' comp case that is obviously fraudulent, or doing the wrong thing in many people's eyes about reporting another officer. Sometimes people would turn around other officers and they would handle that stuff on the outside of the job. This particular incident where I had to have surgeries, it took me out of work. It affected my family life. It affected my physical health, my well-being. There is no other way to do this but to report the officer. He had several issues with females, males, doesn't matter, Hispanic, African-American, Caucasian, whatever you were, he didn't care. He was the untouchable because of his connections there at the facility and with the union. He has a brother-in-law who was the prior vice president of the Mid-Hudson region for New York State Corrections and Police Benevolent Association. Because of that and their connections, he ran around Fishkill in a manner which most people wouldn't be able to get away with. So,
were you at the same facility the entire time?
I was at Sing Sing for 14 months back in 95. I went to the academy in 94. I left Sing Sing in March of 96 and went to Fishkill and had been there since that time. So I did a little over 23 years of state service. But I want to jump back to what the officer's views are of the book. Back in June, on June 30th, my book was released worldwide. It's actually in 14 countries right now. It was released by my publisher, Austin McCauley Publishers. They have offices all over the world, but the only one they have here in the country is in Manhattan. They when they released the book, there was some media that picked up the news on that, and I did an interview with a local TV news company here in my area, and they kind of took my book and put it into their narrative about abuse that's being claimed by inmates and their families. And they put me on the tail end of the interview saying, on the heels of this going on, we have Paul Harrington, a retired correction officer, who's coming forward to talk about the violence and corruption in corrections. And right away, the union came out with a statement saying that I was acting complicit. Why was I waiting 20 years to come out and finally say something about what was going on? They said I was placing officers' lives in danger in my book. But the union, quick to judge a book by its cover, never opened up to this first or second page and saw the dedication that I wrote to the men and women in uniform who are still working inside the New York's prison system. And it has a picture of the badge on top. If you look at your copy of the book, you'll see the same thing, Dan. But I want to say this. It's very common for corrections, the union, correction officers, to jump to the gun, to make an assumption based on an appearance of something without actually looking into it first and getting the facts and then saying, okay, this is what it is. So initially, there was a lot of bad talk about the book amongst officers on their Facebook groups, but I never have been approached by anybody in person, officer-wise or whatever, in a negative manner. I have, in fact, been approached by officers on many occasions who have talked to me about the book. They've read the book. They've written out reviews on it. They loved it. They said, Paul, thanks for having our back. This is 100% correct. Screw those other guys that think differently because they haven't read the book. They just want to make a quick assumption on something, and they're being just stuck hard-minded about it, and stubborn at most times on trying to change their view or their opinion of the book.
When you wrote the book, was there any issues when you were writing the book? Meaning, did you have to get permission? Was there any fear of getting sued or any issues? Because I know you guys worked for a what do you call it? A union. Was there any issues with the union? Do you have to get permission before you release this book?
So if it's interesting you asked that. That's one of the first things we had to look into. It's called taking due diligence. Something that doesn't really happen much in corrections, but the due diligence, interesting term, right?
Right.
The publisher has their own legal team. They comb through the book. My book originally was 154,000 words when I submitted the manuscript, but I think in the final edit, it came down to about 148,000 words. A typical memoir is about 80 to 90,000 words. So I was very fortunate that they didn't chop my book up in pieces when they went through the 3 rounds of editing on it. There's a lot of the story to tell. And from what I'm being advised with my production team is that the timeline of things in that book, if you really were to take out so much of it based on editing, you would really lose the grasp of my experience of everything that I've went through ultimately. So, yeah.
Now, you don't release names and stuff in that book. It doesn't mention people because I've noticed like the officer that attacked you, you haven't mentioned his name. Is it all 100% factual, or have names been changed, or like what's the style of this?
So the book is a nonfiction. It's a biography, and biographies are true. They're true stories. A lot of my documents, they told us in the beginning at the academy, listen, guys, save copies of your paperwork. If you're in any kind of incident, if you're whatever it is, a memorandum, whatever it is, save everything you have because you can't rely on the department to keep a copy of it. So I did that. I have a file cabinet full of documents from 25 years ago. That's what helped me keep my timeline and truthfully say, okay, these are the facts. This is what happened as I referred to many of those documents. But there were probably about 22 people that gave permission to use their real names in the book. Most of them are politicians, professionals, doctors, professors, you name it. All that became part of my research and doing the book. And a lot of those people knew everything that I was going through, and they couldn't have been more than happy to be a part of the book. And that's why they gave me permission. As far as officers are named in the book, everybody is been given an alias. I have a list of those aliases, and I believe there's about 54 total that I have that are in the book that are fictitious names.
Which prison did you have more issues at? Because I know you said you're at two different prisons, correct?
Yes.
So tell us, like, first off, what made you want to become a corrections officer? Did you always want to be a police officer and you decided to go into corrections? Because being a correction officer is you're going to prison every day. You're going and sitting in a prison. It's almost like you're a volunteer inmate for a period of time. So what made you want to do that versus be like a police officer? So
you're right. We're doing our time at 8-hour shifts, so to speak. Sometimes it's a double shift when the gate slams behind you. Actually, the first line of the book says that nobody really wants to grow up dreaming on becoming a correction officer or prison guard, however they want to call them. I want to be fireman, I want to be a policeman, I want to be a doctor, things like that. When I got out of the military, I saw a listing in our local paper for a civil service exam coming up. And I thought, well, working for the state would have some great benefits, medical, dental, all that. And it did. They really did have some great benefits, more so than what I had ever had in the military. And I think that just taking a job to see what it was about, going through the academy for me really wasn't a big deal because, like I said, I had been in the military. I went through boot camp. This is kind of a watered down version of boot camp at the State Corrections Academy in Albany. There were many officers that went in on a job there, first starting out in a couple of weeks of the academy, and they quit. They just couldn't take it, whether it's because they're from Buffalo and they couldn't be away from home. But I was single at the time, and I had no kids. So I just took it to wherever the road led. Where did I have more trouble, at Sing Sing or Fishkill? Obviously, Sing Sing, I was only there for 14 months. And Fishkill, obviously, I did the rest of my time there. So Fishkill was ultimately the biggest issue for me. Again, not relating that to any of the people that work there. There are bad eggs that work there, but the experiences of the incidents that we had to deal with, the biggest things, I did see a lot of action at Sing Sing, but I really can't talk much about that. I can't write a book about Sing Sing like Ted Conover did, but obviously Fishkill is my focal point in the book. As far as inmates go, we're taught in the academy being able to avoid certain. You got to keep a fine line between you and the inmate. They play these mind games. They might try to get over on you by, you're really allowed to give them this or you're not allowed to give them that. And they see a new officer and you don't have that real experience. And the biggest problem with that, and it doesn't matter what prison you went to. If you were new, you were new. If they knew you're right from the academy, they called you New Jacks, and they're able to just play mind games and get over on you all the time. But most of the inmates that I had to deal with, there were many instances where there were rules being broke. There were some infractions that had to be dealt with. If somebody was lying about it and I really had the evidence to prove they were, then I took full course on writing up the ticket on them and seeing it through all the way to their hearing. Sometimes they would have to go to the box over this incident. Sometimes they would just be at Fishkill. It's a medium, so they would be in a dormitory and they would be cube confined in a little box, which is about 3-4 feet tall, walls with a bed and locker and a chair in it. That was what they call a cubicle.
Question about the cubicle. So, because we had cubicles where I was at. Were these cubicles doored off or were they open?
Yeah, you could walk by their cubicle and their neighbors they're all attached to each other. So you literally had your neighbor like inches apart from you.
Right. So it was very similar to like people that are imagining right now, if you were to watch Orange is the New Black, when you see the cubicles, the way they're set up there, you can stand up, you can see over the cubicle. And like we had bunk beds and one single bed with like a little desk in our cubicles. And then there were some other ones that just had 2 beds in a cubicle. Is that kind of comparable to what you're referring to?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So you're at a medium, and in the state, does the security levels go the same? Like in the feds, we have minimum custody, which is, a camp, a low, a medium, a penitentiary. And, everybody would say, oh man, if you're going to the feds, you're so lucky, Camp Cupcake, this and that. But the feds have high security prisons too, where there's beatings and shankings and extortion and gang violence. Did that same type of security level, was that kind of how the run of it was in the state, based on the security level, was based on the severity of danger you were situated with?
At camps, they were run pretty tight. So you had, I didn't personally work at any, but I know of some people that did. There was not a lot of problems at camps. The minimum security, they're able to come and go to work. Those people just wanted to walk a fine line and get out there and go back to their life.
When you say they could go to work, do you mean like their regular job or their prison job?
Their prison job, but we also had a work release program at Fishkill, as do many other prisons in New York State at that security level, where you're taken to work by a state van and dropped off at your place of employment. The check you earn gets turned in at the end of the week, and they deposit it into your inmate savings account. And then you're given so much cash since you're working on the outside to have to buy incidentals. But going through these facilities, whether we're talking about camps or a maximum, there's a big difference in the types of security issues. But funny though is that if you're working a maximum and you're one of those blocks and you're key and unlocking cells, or you're working a camp and you're just answering the phone, whatever, you get paid the same. If you're a correction officer at salary grade 14, and you got X amount of time on a job, if you have more seniority, obviously your pay goes up. But what I'm saying is there's no extra stipends or anything for working a maximum prison versus a medium or minimum. And New York State has been closing a lot of prisons in the last several years. At one point, they had 71 facilities around New York State, including New York City.
Wow. So going from like a high security state prison to a camp type of a status, I imagine if you're at a high security prison, you're probably wearing like Kevlar and whatnot. But as far as the pay goes, now were there so in Coleman, Florida, which is up by Ocala, there's a federal prison there. They've got a camp, a low, a medium, and 2 penitentiaries. So those guards would get sometimes moved around, where maybe this month they're at the penitentiary, next month they're at the camp. Did you guys have situations like that where there was different custodies within the compound?
Yes, I could speak on that matter just for Fishkill and Sing Sing, actually. Sing Sing, when I worked there back in the 90s, had on a lower end of their facility, which is down onto the Hudson River, they had a medium set of dormitories. I believe there was 3 dorms, 3 buildings rather, housing several dorms that were a medium security cubicle situation. And you go up the hill and you have a maximum security area. Whereas at Fishkill, it's a medium with cubicles, and then they have what they call an S block. That's an SHU, Special Housing Unit 200. It's a 200-bed supermax facility, which, because of the HALT Act and a lot of reduction of instances where you have the necessity of a keep lock inmate, those facilities at Fishkill are starting to dwindle down and not be in use.
Now those are not cubicles, correct? Those are at the max and whatnot. Those are like cells, correct?
Yeah, it's a cell. It's got a bunk bed in there. It's got you don't come out really
like
at all there.
23 and 1. You lock down 23 and you get out for an hour to go shower and use the phone, or they have
no, you would get a visit once a week. I believe they're on Saturday nights. You would get a visit for, I think it was like 2 hours. And, we went into an area of the visit room where they had specially built a divider where you didn't have it in a regular visit room, but a divider where you couldn't really have physical contact with the other person coming to visit you. You were able to see them. You were able to talk to them. I know we watch movies, usually go to the visit room, you see people picking up phones. That's not the case there. They had little holes where they could talk through. There was a little port where you'd be able to pass through, like something from the vending machine if they got them a snack or something like that.
Right.
But in S block, the cells themselves have a shower inside there, and they also have a back door to the cell that goes out to a little, I want to say, maybe a 4x6, not even that big, 4x6 foot area that's caged in for you to do exercises and get fresh air and whatnot. So in those extreme circumstances, you don't really come out unless you're going to get a medical checkup or you're coming out to go to a hearing and things like that. Now, there's what they call a box unit at Fishkill, which is also a special housing unit. Those cells have a toilet and a sink, but they do not have a shower. So 3 times a week, you'll take it out of the cell to go into a shower for 10 minutes,
Wow.
10,
So
15 minutes.
So you're only
Yeah.
showering potentially 3 times a week.
Well, yeah, but then you go out once a day for an hour out to the recreation yard.
So you get to go out, potentially work up a sweat, and then might not be able to shower for a day or two until your next shower.
Yeah. And
Wow.
you have to do everything then. You have to shave, all that stuff, you know.
Yeah, I imagine it's
yeah.
probably a different lifestyle. One of the questions I had for you when we were talking about the some of the facilities with the multiple security levels, did you ever see situations where, let's say you got a correctional officer who spent some time in a max, and then he gets transferred over to a camp, and he kind of treats the inmates a little different, a little rougher with them, because he was used to, obviously you're dealing with different mentalities from a camp style to a penitentiary. Would you see some things going on where it's like, man, you don't need to talk to this guy like this. He's a minimum security inmate, nonviolent. And would guards look the other way when something, because it's people stick together, inmates stick together, everybody sticks together. Was there situations where a correctional officer may do something that they shouldn't be doing, but other COs will turn a blind eye to it because it's one of their own?
So if anybody would talk to an officer saying, hey, don't do that, most likely would be a supervisor. Unless it was a buddy of yours, another officer, most officers wouldn't tell you basically how to do your job unless you weren't doing your job.
Right.
But if you were doing a job, they just chalked it up like, oh, he came from a max. That's how he is. That's how it's accepted. I came from a max at Sing Sing, and I went to a meeting at Fishkill, and I can remember just pulling in, seeing inmates outside on lawnmowers, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here? I'm so used to that mentality of the maximum security, and you're getting into a medium, and it's a different world. It really truly is. So I personally haven't seen anybody say, hey, don't deal with this inmate like that. But there are officers who come in there to do their job, and there are officers that, everybody's got different personalities. Some officers working with each other in their cliques had their own ways of doing things, whether it was just a routine. But overall, my observations, whatever anybody had been dealing with an inmate, was quite possibly textbook, even more so. There was plenty of uses of forces that we had, and whether you're a medium officer or a maximum security officer, that doesn't come into play here. You have to really look at the situation and meet force with force. If the inmate has a weapon in his hand, just because you don't deal with inmates a certain way at a medium like you do a max, that's not how it's run. Not in New York State anyway. And I don't speak for every prison in New York State. I'm talking about the 2 that I worked for.
Right.
So you have to deal with the situation at hand and use your training and your skills to de-escalate the situation and to put an end to it. Once they get the cuffs on, force ends, and that's it. We just,
right. Yeah, I could totally see that. If an inmate, whether you're at a camp or a maximum security, if an inmate is threatening, your job is to go home to your family at the end of the day. Some COs would come by, they would do, count time, the mandatory counts, everybody's got to stand up, and usually it'd be 2 correctional officers that would be doing the count. And And sometimes you get correctional officers that would come by and they almost like they want to go out of their way, like they're having a bad day. And then don't get me wrong, there's plenty of inmates that would make their job tougher. The CO would walk by and inmates would fart or burp or say something slick, and then, you know, trying to agitate the correctional officer. Did you see, like, were some correctional officers able to situate their how they would look at the situation better than others, where they wouldn't allow inmates to get under their skin?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts to that question.
Yeah. It's a hard question to ask because, you know, I'm on both sides of the spectrum on this. I'm definitely not, I'm not a inmate advocate. I'm not a correction advocate. I'm, you know, and I also get that you can't treat an inmate like your buddy, because you're not. You're there to do a job, and you show act of kindness, and it could turn into getting extorted. You know, it could start off with, "Man, can we turn the lights off for the movie?" And the next thing you know, you're smuggling in cell phones for this guy. So you know you've got to set your standards. But you know, my own interactions, I've had some COs where, you know, for an example, when I first got to Coleman Federal Prison, there's 4 housing units, or I'm sorry, 3 housing units, A, B, and C. And I was in the A housing unit in the beginning, A1, which is basically the front of the yard. So when they would do their mandatory midnight count, there was a count that took place at midnight. We would pretty much were like the first ones to get counted. So right between like midnight and 12:15, our count would be over. Well, about midway through my prison sentence, I got transferred from the A unit to C unit, which is now the last unit to get counted. It was the middle of the night, and I woke up to use the bathroom, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm still thinking from being an A unit that, oh, the count's already been done. So I go to the bathroom and come out of the bathroom, and there's a CO there, and he's got his flashlight in my face, and he's screaming at me, "I'm going to get a shot. They're going to write me up for being out of bounds." And, you know, just he so vile, where spit was coming out of his mouth. And I didn't say anything. I just walked back to my unit. And then the other CO came up and said, don't pay any attention to him. He's having a bad day. But it's like, man, for somebody to have a bad day like that, to be, you know, inmates are expected to act kind of foolish. They're inmates. They committed a crime. COs, in my opinion, are held to a higher standard because they're to do a job, and they should be expecting sometimes for the asinine inmate. So when you would see behavior like that coming from the correctional staff, it was almost so like I didn't know how I was supposed to react. And to have another CO come over and say, "Oh, just ignore that." It's like, dude, I'm already in prison. How much more do I need to ignore?
Yeah, I've seen that happen.
That's kind of what I was talking about when I would ask if you would see odd behavior where you would just kind of turn a blind eye to it. Not you.
So, you know, you're right. We're all human, inmate, officer, or whatever, superintendent, warden. We're all human first. We have emotions. There are officers that might have a bad day, might be going through a divorce at home, might be having whatever, whether they're intentionally going in with a chip on their shoulder or they had that bad day and they get there and a little incident occurs and then they just really get over, you know, everything's just kind of like, whoa, let's chill here for a sec, because, you know, they get a bad day and people just, they just say, you know what, it is what it is. So just move on and people just, you know, do their own thing. But having that bad day going into an environment like that is just a recipe for somebody to
a disaster, hurt. Right?
Yeah,
Waiting to happen.
It is. It's really the environment itself. I mean, it's a whole other world. But to go in there and to be dealing with those types of situations, I got to tell you, it's you really got to have a clear mind to be able to think about what's going on. If you don't mind, though, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the aftermath of incidents and how the administration deals with that.
Sure. Yeah. Segue into what you mean by that, the aftermath.
So back in 1999, we had a homicide of an inmate. He died of asphyxiation. And when they called it a homicide and I wasn't involved with it, I had been working another post that day. Things turned pretty bad. Inmates all started doing everything together, wearing the same uniform every day. They're allowed to wear state issued uniform or their own on their units. They could wear their sweatpants, t-shirts, or whatever.
Right.
But they were going to the mess hall all dressed in full state greens. They wrote a takeover letter, which I found on a housing unit up in an air duct in the inmate's bathroom, and it was coded. So it took me about an hour and a half or so to decode it, and it was a takeover letter. They wanted to take over Fishkill Correctional Facility on New Year's Day, January 1st, 2000. This is way back. And I took that note up and I went to the watch commander, and immediately he was on the phone with the captain, and the captain called the DEP, and it just went uphill. And they had investigation. OSI came in and they found out that it was about 40 inmates involved who were a part of the inmate liaison committee. And they were the ones that, using their, I guess if you call it privileges, to pass the word around on the units and to get these typed up letters to everyone. But within a couple of days from that incident, finding that, they shipped everybody out. 40 some odd inmates, 250 bags of property. It was a big move, one of the biggest moves that Fishkill had seen at the time. Now, as far as the aftermath of an incident, you could go in there and deal with a lot of violence one day, bloodshed, a stabbing, a slashing, or whatever, and you're involved, you get blood on you, or, you got spit on or whatever. When you go home after you've written your reports, the department, more so the facility, the administration at Fishkill, let you walk right out the gate, go home, come back, and pretend it never happened. Well, after a while of dealing with so many of these incidents, you're going to have this happen over and over again, where you're continually dealing with these issues, and you have to put it somewhere. And we filled our bodies up with all of those emotions, the stress, the post-traumatic issues, and it goes nowhere. And sooner or later, you're going to implode. People come in, they just lose it. They can't take it anymore. Other agencies, other departments, they have staff there. They have psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, things like that talk to the police officer who had a critical incident and find out if he's good in his mind to return to duty. But that never happened with corrections. And the one time that you went out on workers' comp and you went to go see a shrink, the facility knows this because the doctor's office has to submit their notes for the billing back to the state insurance fund in New York State, who was with the workers' comp. They were the ones that had paid all the medical claims for these injuries and whatnot. So word would get back somehow, some way through personnel. Hey, Harrington's out on comp. He's out on psych, something like that. And then all of a sudden you come back to work and you become the runt of the litter. Like, can they say to themselves, can we trust this guy again? Is he reliable? Is he trustworthy? Like, is he going to say something that happens after another incident that we don't want people to know about? So that's a difficult situation. So in my own issue that I had was April 21st of 2015, there was an inmate who we believed at the time was high on K2. K2 was a very common drug within the facilities in New York State prison system, particularly at Fishkill. I was a certified drug lab, NIC and NARC tester. I dealt with the contraband scene quite a lot. It was a lot of documentation, a lot of paperwork involved with that. And I must say, he exhibited and displayed all the patterns of behavior and the side effects that somebody has after they consume K2, which is synthetic marijuana, if you don't already know that. So they were calling for help on that unit, and I responded up there. It took me about 2 minutes, and they were still on the floor with this inmate who was very combative. He had this super strength, after consuming K2, and it was everything that they could do to get this guy under control, as far as body holds and getting his arms behind his back. When I got up there, I was able to put the cuffs on him, and we stood him up, and then we got him in a wheelchair, and we brought him down to the infirmary, where he died of a heart attack shortly thereafter, and they ruled it a homicide. So I was injured at that incident along with 6 other officers, but 2 of us went to the hospital, one by ambulance. I was driven in a state vehicle to the emergency room, and we made phone calls. Hey, where's our union reps out here? Once we found out the inmate died, we had nobody come out. We had an officer that escorted us out there, but that was it. No union guys came. Nobody from the union at all showed up. Nobody from the facility, no supervisors were out there standing at our, to have our backs. And
why was it ruled a homicide?
Well, there's only really like 5 ways somebody can be labeled. You can label a death, and a medical examiner. A homicide isn't necessarily a murder. It's just somebody died at the hands or as a result of actions of somebody else. You have suicide. You have obviously
like if he overdosed
homicide,
or something like that, that wouldn't have been labeled as a. I'm just curious, like
natural causes, things like that. So they
Right.
they had to label this because it was a result of a heart attack having a use of force. They labeled it a homicide, and to us right away, it brought back 1999 all over again. But we weren't trained in asphyxiation back then as we are now. So when the inmate that died in 1999's homicide, he died because of the pile that was on top of him. He couldn't breathe. But we didn't have that training then. And so court said, hey, we have to train your officers better. You have to change your policies, your directives, things that had to come down the pipe in order to make us aware of those types of situations and avoid that in the future. But getting back to us in the hospital, state police showed up, BCI forensics. They started asking questions, pedigree information. What's your name? Where are you from? Where do you live? What buildings do you work? What shift are you on? Once they started getting into particulars about the incident, I stopped them. I said, I can't talk anymore. I haven't done my report. I haven't talked to my supervisors yet. But somehow word got back that the BCI was there questioning us, and that, I had been talking to BCI. But when I stopped their questioning, forensics came in and took my uniform, and they took the uniform of the officer across the hall from me. They photographed you. You take off your uniform shirt, they take a picture. You take off your pants, they take a picture. All 4 sides, front, back, and both sides. And all the way down into your underwear. And to take your underwear off, they visually inspect you naked. They did photos. Must have been 35, 40 photos they did. And, they put everything in paper bags as evidence. They even wanted to take my wallet and my keys, but I was like, come on, really? And we still didn't have union out there. We had nobody saying no to these guys. And we felt the pressure from BCI to say, hey, we have to do this. At the time, we were thinking officers at the jail must be going through the same thing. Absolutely not. So because of my report not being done yet, I was ordered back to the facility, and I was only wearing hospital garments, yellow disposable socks. Those one size fits all little hospital outfits they give you.
Right.
That's all I had on. And I was ordered back into the facility by a lieutenant who was pretty pissed off at the time. And he ordered me back.
Pissed off at you?
Pissed off at the world. Okay. And quite possibly, I have to say, yeah, probably me as well. But again, I had to go back in there. I remember that morning, it was 43 degrees. It's pretty windy outside. We pulled up in front of the administration building. It was like 5:30 in the morning. It was shift change. People were coming in. They saw me and they were like, what the hell is going on? And I had to go right down to the Depot Security's office. And right away, one of my sergeants saw me. He's like, this is bullshit. We need to take care of you, Paul. Let's get him, sweatpants and sweatshirt and some flip-flops or something, because I was so mad. I was so angry that I had to be paraded in there like that. And forevermore after that, months following this incident, the things that were happening, like my overtime pay went missing. My time cards kept becoming missing. Things that I put in for requests, whether it was reimbursement for my uniforms that I lost, things like that became missing. And it was like they were just vindictive. The facility is vindictive. They will get you back somehow, some way when you put them in an uncomfortable position, such as what happened that night.
What was their thought process on what do they think that you did for them to treat you like this?
Well, obviously rumors got around. They said that I was talking to the investigators with the state police. The other officer across the hall had been talking to them as well. Nothing happened with him.
And
but I don't know what he said to them either. So
what were they so concerned that you might be saying? I mean, this all stems back to if there wasn't any foul play and everything was done professional, shouldn't you guys be able to discuss that with the investigators in order to get to the bottom of what happened?
It's not. That's unheard of. Normally we go right, the department operates within its own. We have to do our reports with our supervisors and sit down and go over everything. When you're talking to the outside agency first, that report there might not reflect on the report that's being written inside. An example, I was there putting the handcuffs on. That's not what the information was given to BCI. They were asking me my pedigree information, where I was working that night. And when they started introducing these particular questions, that's when I stopped. And the BCI guys weren't happy. I was like, guys, can't help you. I'm done. Right. I need to get back and do my report. So that's when they send the other guy, say, you know what, take his uniform. They sent the forensic guy in there with the paper bags and the camera and rubber gloves, and here we go. So it was harmful. It was quite a psychological issue to deal with in the days following that for me. Enough to the fact that the guy died, and now I'm stuck, dealing with this. We had to go up to Albany for a state investigation. We had a federal investigation. We had to go to a federal grand jury, which was back in 2015, 2016. You can't really, I believe it was 2015 when we went. Later that summer, I believe it was, that fall, we went to a federal grand jury down in White Plains. But I can't get into the details about that because that's secret. After
did it ever go anywhere? Did an indictment ever come from the grand jury?
No, it was headlines, came out in the newspapers. Matter of fact, we found out from the media first that we were cleared of all wrongdoing before we were even told officially by our department. I mean, how messed up is that?
Right. Yeah, no, it sounds like just a big giant shit show to where one hand didn't know what the other hand was doing. And everybody was so terrified that even if there had been foul play, nobody was going to be the one to speak up about it because they would have lost their job. Was there any formal civil lawsuits that came from like the family?
Yes.
Because he was labeled as, a homicide. So I'm sure the family would have went after something, some kind of damages.
So they were talking to a lot of inmates. Now that the media was involved and there was a platform for them to speak, they were interviewing probably 30 or 40 inmates regarding this incident on April 21st. And a lot of the stories were conflicting. So, the attorney general, the state, they said, there's nothing we could do with it. We can't use these guys as witnesses. Nobody's story, nobody's ducks are in a row. And they all had different versions of it. So, with our situation, we had to contend with all these claims of abuse and everything else that was going on. and you had people protesting in the streets up in Poughkeepsie, New York, Fishkill and Beacon, New York, even down in New York City. They were protesting that homicide for this inmate, and saying that, he was killed by officers, when in fact he was not killed. He died of a heart attack. And, he had heart disease, and it didn't help the fact that he had been in there for drugs.
Right.
And he had K2 prior charges on him prior to this. And he exhibited the behavior of having K2 in his system again that evening.
So he died of a heart attack. Who labeled it homicide then?
The Orange County Medical Examiner's Office
But
at St. Luke's Hospital in Newburgh, New York.
What was it he saw that made him label it as a homicide?
I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't talk to him.
Because we saw crazy stuff where, we had inmates that one guy was having what seemed like to be a heart attack. And when we ran to the COs and we're like, hey, this guy needs medical attention, and the CO was like, well, the medical's closed till tomorrow. And then the next morning, like, guy was dead in its bunk. So I know it's a tough one, because sometimes you've got inmates that are just want to go to the infirmary for every little thing, and you don't know what's a fire and what's not a fire. How much of like that had to be kind of a conflict in there, because you don't want to see anybody die, but yet you can't jump at everybody's request to, hey, I'm not feeling good, and you guys aren't are you guys medically trained to be able to determine if somebody's like beyond where they need true medical attention, or is it just your job to refer them to medical staff?
We receive annual training for CPR, first aid, and AED applications.
Gotcha.
So that's the extent of the training that we have. Whether somebody that's a correction officer has EMT experience or anything else on the outside,
that'd be on
they apply that skill inside, that's on them.
Gotcha.
But most of the time, you would call, if somebody was that bad, you would get on your radio and call for a medical emergency code green. That was an inmate medical emergency, and you would have from our medical unit, which is open 24 hours, 7 days a week. They would come with, either a stretcher of some type, a wheelchair.
They'd bring all their, stuff to check them out, make sure, so
there would be a nurse and an officer coming up there forthwith to either get the inmate transported down or call for an ambulance.
If you could hit the time machine and go back before the day you became a correction officer, would you still go through the process of being a correction officer? And what advice would you give somebody that is in the early stages of becoming a correctional officer?
The department today is not what it was yesterday. There are a lot of different rules and laws now that tie your officers' hands behind your back. There are plenty of instances back in my early days that I could say that I was glad I went into corrections. It was a good job to have. It was you had to deal with, you had good days, but you had your bad days. But then as time went on, worse and worse things got, and you had a lot more bad than good. As far as somebody that's first coming in to corrections, even the benefits aren't there anymore, really. New York State Corrections is hurting so bad, they're having officers quit the academy. They're walking off the job, retiring, or just resigning because of the treatment they're being put through right now. And they're being unheard of amounts of officers that are just walking away. And just recently, the acting commissioner of corrections, New York State Corrections, is coming up with a plan to bring back retired officers. There is a memorandum and a letter issued and mailed out to officers that have retired within the last several years that they want to bring you back part-time per diem. You're not covered under workers' comp. You don't have union rights, nothing like that, but they're paying you like $35 an hour. You pick your facility you want to work at, you pick your shift, things like that. But a lot of guys retired, or, and it's only to retirees, not people who resigned. But the people who are retired don't want to go back. They retired because they saw the writing on the wall.
Right.
And I've seen officers post videos of them burning that letter in their fireplace saying, screw you guys, because there's no way you're going to put me through again what I already had to deal with. And, talking about the PTSD issues of officers, I know you had asked me about uh, sending you some bullet points. I wanted to elaborate on that. Post-traumatic stress. Earlier in this interview, I talked about how our emotions got built up after dealing with a critical incident. You have to walk home, out the gate and you go home, come back the next day, pretend it didn't happen, and start over, right? Well, that you can't just say, all right, delete, and it's gone. It's there in you. And 13 officers committed suicide at Fishkill Correctional Facility while I was working there. And that's not even including all the officers at other correctional facilities around New York State and the nation. And corrections, their statistics show that with officers, we have the highest rate of divorce and suicides in any law enforcement group or agency. I myself almost became a victim on October 24th of 2017 when I called 911 and I hung up the phone. I went on my back deck and I put my uniform on. I went on my back deck with my shotgun and I called for help from a couple of friends. I was emotionally shot. I was done. I had a shotgun by my side, fully loaded, chambered, ready to go. And I thought about ending it. I had 2 little kids and a wife, a home, dogs, everything that everybody dreams about having. And I put all that to the side because I just couldn't deal with it anymore. Eventually, the cops showed up because it was a 911 hang up. One of my friends who was my lieutenant at Fishkill, he's in the book. He was first here and he came around a corner to the back of my house and saw me on a deck and he was pretty shocked. But he was able to make some phone calls and deal with the cops when they got there. I don't want to elaborate too much and give away all the details of what's in the book, but I actually had to go to the hospital for like 4 or 5 days following that. And there's a lot of details about things that I had to deal with. All of a sudden being locked up, being on the other side of that uniform once I had to take it off. No, I wasn't arrested for that. They didn't take me in an ambulance. I knew most of the police officers that came. They had the whole shift was here ultimately. There must have been 10, 12 cop cars outside my house. And, they were very concerned about me. They allowed me to just go in the cop car and they took me in to the hospital and said I was not being committed under them, that I was voluntarily going.
Right.
And my, one of my psychologists who was treating me at the time for the PTSD was able to provide a lot of information to them so that that ultimately was instrumental in me being released to come back home to my family. It's amazing how that happens. I could have been one of those statistics. I could have been number 14. And
was your family aware of what was going on? Like, did your wife know how you were feeling?
Yeah, but not to the point where it involved me with the gun. She just knew everything that was going on. My court cases against the department for discrimination. Remember I said earlier, May 9th, 2017, when that incident happened with that correction officer, and I had to have shoulder surgery and neck surgery, which there's pictures of that in my book as well. Goes into great detail, everything that I had to deal with. I hadn't gone back to work since then. And ultimately I was given my 3/4 disability pension. It's a section 207 performance of duty disability that I was awarded by the state retirement system and the comptroller's office. And the department was fighting on giving me my retirement badge and ID. I mean, it took like 6 months. Normally they give that stuff, but they weren't accepting the documents.
Right.
Albany headquarters personnel for the department said, no, we don't find that significant. And we, based upon our findings, your request for your retirement badge and ID is denied. And I have a copy of that letter still. I mean, again, save your documents, right?
Right.
So, and I fought it, and I fought it, and I took it to other agencies, and finally, I was able to get my retirement badge and ID.
Paul, do you feel the system is just a New York problem? Do you feel it's statewide? Because it seems like from both ends of the spectrum. You've got all of these COs that are kind of left to kind of fend for themselves. They can't really speak up because they're at risk of being, exiled. They're at the very least, they're at risk of being kind of excommunicated from the groups where who wants to go to work under a volatile environment like that. Then you've got all of these inmates that are going into prison, and it's supposed to be, a reform type of a situation. And there's a lot more punitive than there is reform. So you've got inmates that aren't quite getting the reform. You've got COs that are really given the training that you described as like the training that you would get as like a lifeguard. You're given some CPR training, a little bit of this. And then when you have issues, there's no real psychological help. And if you ask for psychological help, you're putting yourself into a situation where you have to deal with all kinds of other issues, to the point where many people, including yourself, almost forced to commit suicide. What is the ultimate answer to this, if there is an answer? Like, how do you think a situation from both sides gets fixed?
Anything inside the prison system today in New York State is a long way from being fixed. If anything, right now, the way people are walking off the job there and whatnot, the whole New York State with the HALT Act and with the bail, the bail issues right now, where they're not really coming into the system and they're letting them out. So, your numbers are lower as far as the amount of inmates in New York State. At one point, there was over 70,000 inmates in the state. Now they're down to around 50,000.
Does that have anything to do with like COVID?
No, it's
okay.
COVID. They did do some releases during COVID. They kind of expedited on some levels, but I can't really speak on particular numbers.
Okay.
Because remember, my last day there was in 2017.
Yeah, you had already hauled ass before. Thank God. Could you imagine like being there during those days where you're forced to go in there and it just depends on, I guess, your political views at that point. But man, I
have a lot of friends who still work in there, and I hear this every day. I mean, I'm not even working in there anymore, but it's like I'm still there. The nightmares I have,
bro,
hearing what's going on, reading the news, hearing what's going on from all my former colleagues, what they're going through. It's just horrible. And
go ahead.
Another thing I really wanted to cap on was, you talk about like the injuries we described earlier. The workers' compensation system in New York State is broken. It is almost depleted. It is horrible for an officer who gets injured on a line of duty to come out and not be able to get treatments. So many area medical providers no longer take workers' comp. They don't accept it. Psychs aren't taking it. Medical doctors, surgeons, hospitals aren't taking it. And where does an officer go? And he's left and he's waiting in line forever to get into some place because they can't take more new patients. Meantime, you got the department is telling you, hey, you got to get back to work or show us a note. And then you have officers, right, that have legitimate injuries, finally find a doctor, only to have the state insurance fund deny treatment, deny authorizations to get an MRI to show proof that you're injured, and they make you go back to work light duty, and then you go back. It's a broken system.
Yep.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yep.
There are people being hurt in there every day, and they can't get the right treatment. And workers' compensation and the New York State Insurance Fund really need to be overhauled and reformed.
The problem is, I don't think it's just a New York problem. I think this is a nationwide problem. Every issue that you just described, we could put inmate in front of every one of those, because not everybody that goes to prison is some kind of a serial killer or a madman. You've got some good people that made some bad choices, but they go through the prison system, and when they get out, there's so many hoops that need to be jumped through. And the problem is you're given like a list of things you need to do, which sounds okay, this is doable, but then when you go to get them done, there's no real system in place to where it's almost designed to fail. I was very fortunate. I was able to make a career out of it, but everything you just said about how all of your friends that you kind of live, I hate to use the word vicariously, but you're kind of living through them, what they're going through. And it's the same as as a federal prison consultant, all of my clients that hire me are people that are either getting ready to go into prison, they're in prison, they're getting ready to get released. And it's almost like I never left. I just don't see how anybody, it's only the policymakers are making policies without they've never had boots on the ground. They don't really know the policies that they're mapping out on how it's affected, because the people on the ground are not heard. They're almost silenced. At least if you're an inmate and you're treated wrong, you can get out and scream from the rafters because you're not going to lose your career. As a CO, a correction officer, and especially if you've moved up through the ranks and you're in any kind of a position, the last thing you want to do is make any waves, because now you're risking losing pensions, you're risking losing your job. And we can all agree it shouldn't be about that. It should be about human nature taking care of itself. But the vicious cycle, the whirlwind, I think a lot of people, if you touch on this in your book, I'm sure it ruffles a lot of feathers from people that kind of perpetuate the madness. But I'm sure a lot of people that are going through feeling like they're all alone, they can't talk to anybody, nobody understands, and seeing yourself, and there's probably a million other people just like you that can relate to them, but now creating like a communities method where people that have been through what you're going through can speak to somebody. It should
Yeah.
You shouldn't be able to be a CO without consistent psychological evaluations, because
Right.
your life is in danger on a daily basis. Your inmates' lives are in your hands to an extent. Your family, what would happen if you'd gone home and you're like, fuck it, I'm going to take myself out and I can't leave my poor family behind, so I'm going to take them out first. So, thinking this baffled train of thought that is obviously not logical, but we create an illogical perspective to move on to the next stone.
Yeah, and you know what? In New York State Corrections, they're very, very quick to point the finger back at you. They don't want to take the blame for anything. Indemnification is one thing, but when it's an incident involving like instances where there's PTSD, where there's
why
a
didn't
near-death situation with a suicide,
why didn't you reach out?
Right. What they're doing is they're money more quarterbacking it. They're not going to take the blame. That day that I went out there with that shotgun, New York State Corrections owned that gun. I owned the gun, but their name was all over it.
Right.
They're the ones that put me in that position. And I'm sure the 13 other officers that I know that committed suicide would have said the same thing if they survived. And I got to tell you, there are a number of correction officers, police officers, sheriff's deputies, and whatnot that have come to me knowing my story, and they're in similar situations. So I've been advocating for them, pointing them the right direction. You need to go see this person, go talk to this guy, this girl, this doctor, this lawyer. You really need to speak to these people, put you in good hands to put you in a position where ultimately you're going to come out on top like I did with my fight. So my thing is, over the years, I've seen a lot of officers just kind of take it in stride, say, you know what, it is what it is. I'm not going to fight this. And they go back to work and their morale is shot and they just can't take it anymore, So I really want to say that anybody else that's out there right now having these types of situations, no, you're not alone. You're not alone. Suicide awareness. There is a new number to call out there. And, I really think that you can't try to absorb everything and deal with it by yourself. And regardless of what other people think, remember, you have a family. Even if you don't have family, you yourself are responsible for yourself. Take care of yourself first. Don't worry about what the job says or what they think, because you know what? You're the one that signed a dotted line to go work for them, not the other way around. They didn't tell you to come work for them. So if you can find another job to get out of there, it would behoove you to do so.
Well, Paul, I want to first thank you for coming on and talking to a guy that spent time in prison. So to hear it from that perspective is pretty cool. Where can people, this is Paul's book, everybody, and this is, about 400 pages of some solid writing in here. Where can people find your book? We've got your Facebook page up right now. But how should people locate you to get the book? What's the best way?
All right. So, as I said before, the book was released in 14 countries. Right now, it's all over the world: Australia, United Arab Emirates, Canada, Mexico just picked it up, Germany, Japan, you name it. But here in the United States, obviously on the World Wide Web, you can go to Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, eBay has it, Walmart and Target has it online as well. You'll be able to find it in bookstores around the Hudson Valley area right now of New York State. The Barnes and Noble right now has me on book tours, doing signings and events with them. And soon I'll be headed out around the western part of New York this winter. I have a book signing coming up this weekend on Sunday, November 6th from 2 to 4 at the Palisades Mall in West Nyack, New York at the Barnes and Noble store there. Come in and see me there for a book. Or you can, like I said before, you can order one online. They are available in ebook on Kindle, or you can get a paperback version or a hardcover.
And is there a link on your Facebook page, or should they? Because we're going to drop a link to wherever they can buy it at in this video. But obviously Amazon. How many books have you sold so far?
So, being a first-time author, an unknown name, my publisher, they said, with the contract, the way it worked out was that, and everybody's like, at first they're like, oh, this is like money bags, with money grab. Not like that. I spent like $7,000 my own money to get this book done.
Right.
Now, as far as this book coming out, and the sales of it, I don't see the numbers yet. I think it's December is when I see my first royalty on the sales. And that's when things will come back to me and they'll say, okay, here's what we've sold so far. And then we'll go from there.
Okay. So you don't know how many yet you've sold quite a few. You're in all different countries. So it's not about the money. I mean, I'm just saying, is the book getting out there as far as is it getting in people's hands?
Oh yes.
Have you got any reviews back yet? Any feedback?
I've gotten, close to 40 reviews back already on Barnes and Noble as well as on Amazon. I've been getting a lot of reviews from people in person. I've asked people, if you've read the book, go ahead on to Barnes and Noble or Amazon and place your review on there. There was a lot of great feedback on social media with it. I'm really feeling confident that this is going to be moving forward. And currently I'm talking with a film company out of New York City who are reviewing my book right now for a possible series, documentary.
Very cool. Well, congratulations, man. I hope this book is not just a big financial success. I hope this book helps many individuals that are going through the same type of, the mental tragedy that you had to travel for this book to pop itself out the other end. Any of our followers that happen to watch this, anybody that is interested in the book, if you click on the link, we'll put a discount on there where you'll still get your full fee, but we'll go ahead and pick up 10% of the cost for anybody, for any of our followers or listeners that wants to pick up the book, 10% off if you purchase it through us. So that's a little savings that we can pass on to the customer and doesn't affect your end.
That's awesome. You guys, it's really great talking to you. I really hope to come back and see you guys again.
Well, I appreciate you very much, Paul. Great story, great motivation. I think a lot of people relate with this, and maybe next time we'll do a little live one where we can get some engagement from the community. I think a lot of people will definitely, especially people getting ready to go to prison, they might have a lot of questions on how they should interact with COs. So guys, I'm RDAP Dan, Federal Prison Time Consulting, people up and people, communities method, one day at a time. Be safe, everybody. We're out of here.